All right, I am by myself today. Good old Brett Salakas, the HP Education Ambassador. I'm without a co-host, but we are going to talk to Audrey Lim, a fascinating lady. She's from Singapore. I'm going to ask her a few questions about the Singapore education system, a little bit about the history of Singapore and how that shaped Singaporean psyche. We'll also talk about her love and her passion of fighter jets and innovation. And as she works for Intel, we'll also dive into Intel's Skills for Innovation. It's an interesting program where teachers can sign up. It costs nothing, but teachers sign up. They either get these starter packs to be able to do these innovation programs with their students, or they can do self-growth and do some professional development and get actual certification from Intel directly. So very, very exciting, very, very interesting. I can't wait to talk to Audrey. Let's get started and dive right in. Audrey Lim, I'm so excited to be here talking to you today on this episode.
Thank you, Brett. Pleasure to be here.
Before we even start, I've got two questions for you. Obviously, for those people who are watching, not listening but watching, can probably see a gigantic big Intel sign that's floating above my head. But I'm curious because you work for Intel. I'm going to ask you two questions. I want to know what you do at Intel before we dive into our conversation today. And you have a very curious background on your screen, and I want to unpack what that is too. So, what is your role at Intel? What do you do?
So I am the education specialist representing Intel in this segment where we have our Center of Excellence focus on all the education segment, anything from K1 to K12 or to the higher education segment. I've been at Intel for just about 7 years.
Started there when you were 20. Unbelievable.
Thank you. But having come from a technology background, this is only my second job in my whole career. My mom was a teacher. I was really inspired by what she did, but and really, this opportunity to join this education team came about 9 months ago, and grateful for the many opportunities within Intel to take on such a role that I'm truly passionate about. So, in the past, I used to do regional roles around technical enablement, supporting the pre-sales roles, pre-sales account teams, the account managers. But right now, I'm smack in the heart of making an impact, because in the lives of anyone's lifelong journey of learning, from the educators all the way down to the students, right? So my role at Intel really is to show how Intel, at the very heart of our goal and mission as a technology provider, how we can make an impact in the lives of people. How can we leverage technology and make an impact in the lives of people? And we do this in many ways, and probably I have the opportunity to speak about shortly. One area is Intel Skills for Innovation, where we contribute back to our educators, our policymakers in the various ministries and district education officers of the why Intel value proposition. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be on your show, your podcast, Brett.
Yeah,
But a little bit about the what you see in the backdrop, right? That's a F-16 fighter jet taken off my smartphone camera, zooming past my window every other day if I do work from home. The noise coming from these fighter jets is tremendous, but it really blows your mind away when you see them flying right past in your balcony. The whole excitement and opportunity to accelerate and make things happen, So I have this as my backdrop, as a little part of me that, what gets me excited.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, because as educators, we are curious people. And it's one thing to say, hey, we've got a solution, we've got something really cool. but it's another thing to understand the origin and the why and the who and the backstory of everything. So before we get into the skills for innovation, which I'm very, very excited to be able to start sharing with our listener base, I would really like to know, you said you're in Singapore, you've got your F-16 there, very excited. That's something that people who are listening in Australia, in New Zealand, actually have quite a large listener base on the Reinvent podcast army here. We've got a growing base in Bulgaria, a growing listener base in Sweden. We've got a pretty broad a pretty broad listener base here. The very strong the the Reinvent army is growing and recruiting. But here you are in Singapore, talking about the F-16s flying past your window. Let's unpack that a little bit. Like, whereabouts geographically in Singapore are you based? Because I've got a soft spot for Singapore, having lived and taught and worked and led a school in there.
Yeah, I live in the northeastern part of Singapore. Singapore is no bigger than, I don't know, not even the size of Sydney. We are what, 200 square kilometers?
Geographically smaller than Sydney. Geographically smaller than the city of Sydney.
Yes. Yeah. But in that tiny dot, we pack like 5.5 million people in that really small land space. So 80% of our citizens live in public housing, these high-rise, what we call public housing development board, which is built by the government. 20% live in private. I live in the northeastern part where the Republic of Singapore Air Force has their primary air base.
Is that far away from Changi Airport? Is it far from Changi?
Changi would be in the east. I'm in the northeast, so not exactly far away. From my place to Changi Airport, without traffic, would take about 20 minutes.
Okay.
By car, 25 minutes by car. Yes, and the air base is a busy air base. Every time there is, the pilots will take their flights out. At one time, there will be at least 5 planes zooming past my window at various speeds. They also have the big jumbo carriers that are used for logistics to transport goods. A very important role because Singapore is such a tiny island, and to strengthen our security and position around our friendly neighbors, we have to go our airspace is quite limited, so they have to go pretty fast I've asked the pilot actually when I was at the air show 2 years ago, once they're up in the air, how long do they take to get around the island? It's like they have to fly beyond, the open seas to go out. They take about an hour and a half to go around multiple rounds to, maximize their time out in the air space. But yeah.
Now, it's an interesting, like a geopolitical sense. Singapore is a fascinating story. Like even the history of Singapore, its growth from the early days. From the first people who were there and Peranakan, is it, did I pronounce that right by memory? Peranakan people?
Peranakans, yes.
Yeah, the Peranakan to the influx of different settlers, and then obviously the influence of the British and Stanford Raffles and all those sorts of people, and the change of the trading hub and almost the I guess the battle at one time between who was going to be the largest port hub, was it in Malacca or Singapore? And I think a long time ago, obviously that battle of dominance of where the trading route was going to be, and obviously Singapore then ends up sort of a huge strategic part of the British Empire, and then some horrific, horrible things happen in World War II, and there's some lessons that come out of World War II that Singapore learned, like that almost that never again, that almost the same type of lesson that sometimes you hear people in America talk about Pearl Harbor and never forget what happened at Pearl Harbor and the lessons we can learn from that. Singapore are a little bit the same, like almost like that prickly porcupine. Might be small, but it's got a few spikes.
Yeah, we fought very hard for our independence, and there are many memories about the war, as you called out, Brett. Fortunately, or I did not need to, or my generation did not need to live through that, but my parents did. My father was late to completing his school. He only completed his A levels equivalent when he was in his 20s because he missed a few years of school during the wartime, right? But the only way is to look forward because of the commitment that our forefathers had from the people who migrated into Singapore to the original people who lived in Singapore, what they did to build up Singapore to where we are today. The government has not forgotten truly the work and effort, and we call them the pioneer generation in Singapore. And in the last few years during COVID and all, the government has taken great strides to ensure that these seniors, a lot of whom actually who even did not get the opportunity to really get a proper education then are taken care of, right? So they are given special cards in recognition to get special pricing for food or transportation, medical treatment. And again, depending on which generation you come from, the pioneer generation, the early forefathers, to the Merdeka generation, those that were here during the major change of since we got our independence. Merdeka stands for independence, or independence from Malaya or Malaysia as we know it, and to where we are today as a cosmopolitan melting pot of people, right? You've been here, Brett, right? That make us so successful.
Strangely enough, like Singapore is close to my heart. I do actually consider Singapore as my second home. Like I moved there. I began teaching in Singapore in my late 20s. I evolved as a teacher. I led a school in Singapore. Like I felt like in your early 20s, you're still finding out who you are. I guess I didn't become a man. I became a genuine, fully fledged adult, self-determining my own life, my own direction in Singapore. And Singapore will always have a very, very special place in my heart because of that. I kind of lived in a place called Ulu Pandan. Is a little bit in between Holland Village with the Holland Village. You wouldn't expect a big windmill in the middle of a Southeast Asian country, but a big
Yes.
Dutch windmill in Holland Village, and then probably Clementi. I was somewhere a little bit
That's right.
halfway between there. But it's interesting. You talk about the lessons and the, I guess, the cultural learnings, and we're here to talk about education, but the cultural learnings that Singaporean society have taken away from the foundation of your republic, the foundation of your national identity. It's quite fascinating because for a little country, you pack a big punch. Like there's here I am, obviously working for HP in partnership with Intel. I know the HP factory is in Singapore, a fully automated factory, like all robotics across the whole way, manufacturing things, a complete game changer in technological advancement. And that's why I was fascinated by your F-16, not necessarily from your love of or piqued my interest of the curiosity of your background there, but fighter jets themselves are a fascinating metaphor of technological advancement. If you look at the short period of time that humans have had flight, and what the modern day fighter jet could do. It's just brilliant. I had a very deep conversation with a Catholic priest, actually, at a school that I used to teach at, and I've stayed in contact with this priest. He's a very interesting fellow. He has, as someone devoted to peace and respect and kindness, fascinated, not obsessed, but fascinated by fighter jets. And he talks about it there being abhorrent in the concept of a war machine and the horrific potential
Mm.
that they have,
Yeah.
but at the same time, this duality of the complete fascination in the technological capability to fly so fast and do things, each generation of the fighter jet doing things that the previous generation was not able to do. It's a real litmus test for, I guess, the development of technology within our modern world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm Catholic too, so yeah, I mean I guess that's how I guess what the excitement of what technology can potentially build into um and accelerate, what our learnings in what's potentially possible, right? And planes are a visual view. I mean, I enjoy taking planes to go for my many holidays if I can afford to, now that we're out of the COVID period. But the planes continue to fascinate me in the strangest way, right? So
I think
being up close to one, yeah,
it's a natural human instinct just to be at the awe in awe of something that just has such surreal like supernatural power almost, the speed, the
almost, yeah.
just wild, just
Flying
wild.
at the speed of light, almost in the shortest time possible. That's, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it is a site. If anyone like Singapore, obviously a hub of tourism.
Hmm.
Anyone who is in Singapore, if you get the right time of the day, particularly obviously at the right season, you'll see the fighter jets actually fly over in formation quite regularly. It's a sight. It's a sight to hear. It's a sight to hear.
Yeah.
I'm mixing
To
up my
hear
I'm
the
mixing up the
boom, you
senses
can't
there,
hear.
but you do actually hear it. You see it and you hear it.
It vibrates. Actually, my office workstation, the tiny one that I have in my bedroom, the floor rumbles when the fighter jets zoom by. It's like, and I'll go, whoo, like, wow, make my day.
I kind of find it fascinating. Audrey Lim, who would have known? Audrey Lim, lover of fighter jets. I'm going to bring you a little
Well, I
toy.
have this weird dream, Brett.
Yeah, go.
And maybe in my bucket list one day, if I've enough cash to get my private license, flying license one day, but not in Singapore context. It costs way too much to get a private license, pilot
You'll have to
license.
come. You'll
Yeah.
have to come over to Australia for a visit. We had Mark Christie, a very fascinating person in himself, currently working with
Uh-huh.
the Northern Territory government. A friend of the
Okay.
podcast, Mark Christie, on a different episode, actually has an ultralight license, and he flies these little ultralights. And I don't know if you know what an ultralight is, but it's almost like those very cheap plastic sort of seats that you sit on as a child in a classroom. Imagine that
Uh-huh.
strapped to just a very open frame. And literally open, no sides, no walls on this airplane, just a frame of a base plate, like a go-kart that happens to fly out in the sky. It is
Wow.
scary. You have to come down for a flight one day.
I would love to. I would love to.
Look, I'm curious. While I have you, I've got an interesting opportunity, and I know we're going to dive into skills for innovation, and we're talking about technology and
Mhm.
improvement and advancement, and that's something that Intel itself is renowned for, right? Like we talked about,
Mhm.
obviously, Singapore growing and improving and learning from the past, and fighter jets evolving every generation. That's something that Intel sits at the top of a very tall tree, known for innovation, and we're going to unpack skills for innovation. But while I have you, I've got a unique
Mhm.
opportunity to actually ask you. We've got teachers from all over the world that listen into this podcast. I'm curious to unpack a little bit about your own story, because Singapore has a unique education system in itself. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with education in Singapore? Where did you go to
That's a
school?
tough question, Brett.
Well, I have looked you up when we first started connecting. I did
Yep.
look up, and I know where you went to. Well, I don't know where you went to school as a little girl, but I do know where you went to university. So I'm keen to explore that as well.
So I started my education in a public preschool, actually, to say the least. I didn't even go to, yeah, I went to a public preschool that was run by the government for 2 years before I went into a public primary school and a secondary school. So these are schools within um, your neighborhood, no further than 5 kilometers. There is a public school within the vicinity of where you stayed in. Unfortunately, my parents did not send me to a Catholic school, but never mind. I often get mixed up as a convent girl for various reasons because one of the key requirements in the public school, which follows the British education system, the British curriculum, um, the Singapore government has somewhat tweaked it to ensure that every Singaporean child, besides taking our mother tongue, which is taking English as the primary mode or primary language that's taught across all the subjects, including math, science, at least at the primary school, all of us were required to take a mother tongue, right? Unfortunately for me, when my parents lived through the war and they they never spoke a word of mother tongue to my generation, at least to me and my siblings. So I struggled for a good 10 years in my primary school all the way to secondary school, coping with this mother tongue, which was a mandatory requirement in order to get into high school or a technical college, a diploma, where you would take a polytechnic, right? So to my horror, after completing 10 years of study in the public school, I did decently well enough. I was in the only science school in my class in the neighborhood. But I did not do well enough to get into high school because I failed my mother tongue, right? I had help, extra classes, enrichment classes to cope with that, but
Mm.
unfortunately, I just didn't get through it. So everything happens by the grace of God. I entered the at that point in time, 30 years ago, it was one of the only two polytechnics in Singapore. I entered Singapore Polytechnic to complete my diploma or specialist diploma in electronics, triple E, electrical, electronics, and communications, right? And that landed me into my first technology pre-sales role as a pre-sales engineer specialist at Northern Telecom, and I spent a good 20, almost 24 years in that company, right? Until, unfortunately, that crown jewel that where we invented the telephone, our founders invented the telephone. We went bankrupt and we folded up after 104 years in the industry.
Wow.
So Intel is my most current gig, but yeah, that's me in my
What?
education. Oh, I didn't talk about my university, but you did look up, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No.
True again, grateful. I started work really young, right after my diploma, and my company sponsored me for my degree, which I did externally with the University of London, um, with a specialty or focus in management, right? Economics and management. So
Did
that
you
complemented my technical know-how diploma that I acquired through Singapore Polytechnic. Yeah,
did you
that's
get
me.
to go and live in the UK to do your university, or were you doing it like correspondence?
No, my brothers did. They went for 2 years after they completed their diploma, but uh, Nortel or Northern Telecom then gave me such a great opportunity to work and study at the same time, which I managed to achieve. Right.
Look at it.
So
It's quite
so I did
fascinating.
not go.
It's quite fascinating, and I genuinely thank you for sharing your personal story. As someone who taught in Singapore, the Singapore education system is rather unique. You have that K1, K1, K2. So where
Hmm.
most other countries we call it prep or kindergarten. We do call it kindergarten here in Australia. Or in the part of
Yes.
Australia I'm at, we call it kindergarten, but it's in other states known as prep and other states known as formation. So there's lots of different names for that age group. But
Hmm.
K1 being non-compulsory and K2 being compulsory. So you have almost even that in itself, a little bit of a tweak of what happens elsewhere, and then as you said, like that, almost that benchmark that you need to get to go into to different levels and different
Hmm.
streams of learning. And this is not something that I am aware of in too many other countries. To my
Mm.
knowledge, it's quite unique to Singapore. There might be other countries that do it as well, but to certainly to my limited knowledge of what happens around the world, and I'm relatively well traveled in the education
Mm.
sort of sphere. But there's a streaming test in P4, and again at P6, and then it's a primary 4,
P6
primary
as the
6.
major.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and then streaming into which high school or which further learning you get, and even depending there upon which
Hmm.
stream of high school you go into, can determine whether you go straight to university or polytechnic or
Hmm.
where you go. So it's quite. Look, I will be honest, like as an Australian educator working there, it was quite confronting to think that the performance of a
Hmm.
child in P4, primary 4, or P6, primary 6, so when you're 11 years old, 12
Determine your
years old,
future.
can have such an epic positive or detrimental design and shape your entire life. I know myself, like I was a very late bloomer. You talk
Mm.
about mother tongue not being spoken at home.
Yeah.
My parents, not the same story, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, uh, I probably wasn't exposed to lots of literature until my teen
Hmm.
years, and I had
Mm.
an explosion of knowledge and understanding, and almost a personal renaissance of development in my mid to late teens. If I was judged when I was
Mm.
11 or 12, I'd be very curious to see how my life would have fanned out. But it's quite interesting because we know as as high stakes as those young exams
Yes.
are, it does also. How do you judge the impact and value of your education system? We know that when we compare Singapore and the PISA results, I'm not sure if you're familiar with PISA, but
Hmm.
PISA is the collection of all the OECD nations around the world. And we all
Okay.
do at 15 years old. They assess 15-year-old students from around the globe. Singapore,
Okay.
almost always at the moment, or certainly for the last few iterations, because they do it like the Olympics, they measure every few years. But Singapore has risen, and now sits almost always number one or number two in the last few rounds. So Singapore's education system on a PISA results, where we're measuring
Hmm.
literacy, numeracy, science. Singapore very very high performing. But it's curious as to
At what
yeah, yeah,
expense?
at what expense? Yeah, where's that balance, and what's the purpose of education? And I guess this is what I want to talk to you today,
Hmm.
because my view, and people who are familiar with the podcast, you probably heard me say it almost ad nauseum. I talk about education when you boil down the rationale for a
Hmm.
government, for a society to have schools. Why do they exist? Why does an education industry exist? It
Mm.
exists so that society, that community, can have a funnel to develop two things for our students. Either we are producing students with higher learning and preparing them for further learning, or we're
Hmm.
producing students to enter the workforce. They are the two core reasons why a government, why a country, why a community has education. And I guess
Hmm.
it's how do we best do that? And I guess that's the perfect moment and then talk about Intel have a fantastic program that augments and supports and helps contribute to that development, either of further learning or particularly the skills,
Hmm.
the innovative skills that will allow our students to be more employable and more value and give them opportunities to I guess find their niche in the workforce. So can you tell me a little bit about the what is the Intel's Skill for Innovation program?
We created this framework the skills for innovation framework that you talk about, Brett, really was to address the demands of the workforce, right? As you called out correctly, why any government in the world invests, puts, outside of defense, education is the next biggest ticket item that any government would invest in, with the sole purpose of getting jobs into the country, getting investments into the country. And these are just some of the many conversations that we have had with our customers around the region, right? So a true test of the success of any education system really lies on, outside of the subjects or curriculum being taught in the classroom, are we really imparting the right knowledge or skills to help the educators, build on the mindsets and the skills of the students that are here to learn from these experts in the classrooms about what's really important for them, so that they can be ready for the workforce. So there is we looked at the needs of the economy, and we realized that a whole host of jobs are disappearing, and with the newer economy requiring more digital skills, more roles are being created, and a lot of manual jobs are disappearing. And because of this forecast of the new skills that are required, we invested as Intel into this framework called Skills for Innovation to define or to help shape out really, not so much about how much technology you need to know, but how can we reinvent the role of technology in education to bridge this gap that we talk about in this technology hungry job market, right? Now, outside of the technology skill sets, right, we also want to level up the soft skills or the cognitive levels of the students, right, from rote memory, memorizing, and to moving up, the Bloom's taxonomy that we talk about, into how can you apply or analyze or learn or reinvent what you already know to, resolve real world problems, right? So through this framework, of Skills for Innovation, we integrate technology activities into the existing curriculum that's being taught at schools in everyday teaching. We're not talking about a standalone lesson or subject that the educators have to go and figure out by themselves. But, how can we introduce the use of hands-on activities, technology-related activities, to tie it to the curriculum that's being taught at school, whether it is a English subject or a humanities subject or a STEM subject, right? To apply to real-world scenarios. And that's in essence what Skills for Innovation brings, right? Integrating technology through the use of activities into existing curriculum, and helping to introduce these 7 skill sets and mindsets, right, that the real workforce is looking for in preparing the students for the future workforce.
So if I'm a teacher, and I'm listening to this podcast, or I'm in a position where I want to sharpen the curriculum that I'm delivering to help my students have some of these 7, and I'm going to ask you in a moment what are those. What are those 7 things that you've identified? So what are those things? What are those 7 items? And what do I get out as a teacher if I sign up for the Skills for Innovation? What am I able to utilize to be able to deliver this concept?
So there are 2 major pillars in the framework for Skills for Innovation. One framework is one major module is the Skills for Innovation Starter Pack. But before I go into that, right, let me answer the first question that you had, right? What are the 7 skill sets and mindsets that we have built this whole framework around? It starts with the social emotional skill sets. As we build out, we want, in this digital world, we want students to be more sensitive to the needs of their peers in their environment, right? And then as we level up the broader soft skills, we're also talking about some of the mindsets that we hope that the students will gain through their domain expertise, right? Using computational thinking or design thinking skill sets, right? And as we expand on the I guess the design thinking skill sets, or even the social emotional skill sets, right? Thinking like, how can I be more collaborative with my peers? How can I be more tolerant or persistent in building up, the projects that I work on, right? And as we move to design thinking or computational thinking, we're looking at things of being, how can I ideate or define or build prototypes or empathize with my peers? And as I move to computational thinking as another mindset that this framework builds on, we're talking about pattern recognition, algorithms, and decomposition, and finally, but not least, right, the technical know-how, right? The technological skill sets, the remaining four technological skill sets, which includes data science, AI and machine learning, programming and coding, and simulation and modeling. And there's a whole mismatch, mix and match of expanded skills that these four technological skill sets brings, right? Including AI learning models or defining problems in the simulation and modeling to problem solving in coding and programming, or using or analyzing, doing data visualization through data science, right? So the whole framework is really this leveraging on this combination of soft skills, social emotional skill sets, all the way to the technological skill sets in computational and programming and simulation and modeling that we talk about, right? To help build out the capabilities of the students that the workforce requires these new skill sets and mindsets. Now, to the educators on this podcast, what we bring to you is the opportunity to experience these 7 social, emotional, and technological skill sets that I talk about, right? And this combination of experience comes in a very neat package, right? Out of the box, we have in a starter pack is for you to bring to your classroom in the subjects that you teach in your existing curriculum, right? To be able to deliver these 7 skill sets and mindsets, or combination of these 7 skill sets and mindsets, um, all the way from elementary school all the way to high school, right? In this bundle, we have a combination of an educator's guide, right? We also have a combination of a teacher's guide and an actual full activity, right? So the starter packs were really designed with the intention of mapping that 7 skill sets and mindsets that I talk about, so that we can have a technology infused experience, learning experience for your students, right? And this could be a combination of using some cloud-based software or some software programs that can be downloaded into the computers in your labs or in your classrooms. And if you have fancier computer labs with 3D printers or laser cutters, you can have a full hands-on activity, a 2-hour activity introduced in your classroom. So the three starting points that we offer through these starter packs, each activity will have an educator's guide, a teaching guide, and working files for you as an educator to take and bring to the classroom to experience the use of technology and a combination of the 7 skill sets and mindsets that we talk about to be taught in your classrooms out of the box, truly out of the box. Right? So this requires a shift in the mindset, right? I guess, Brett, before you come in, a shift in the mindset in the past, really. And it's still happening today, very much so. And forgive me if I've said the wrong thing, really, right? Educators, gurus, you are subject matter experts in your domain and expertise. But with the fast-paced, ever-changing role of technology in today's world, we do not need to be a know-all for everything before we can introduce something new. The shift in mindset requires the educator to think about, I can facilitate this. There's a lot of technology, software, and programs. There's so much to learn, but do I need to know everything about Python or programming before I can introduce a lesson in that? Of course, we have. That's why we have our communities to help enable you to bring that confidence, or the whole starter pack and the teacher's guide are very, very comprehensive with step-by-step details into running that full activity into your classroom, right? So we are here to support you through this starter pack activity and framework. The right to use is free of charge, right? Today we only have 70 starter packs because we want to give you the opportunity to experience it upfront, right? And our hope is really like-minded people, educators like you who are on this podcast, truly see the value of embracing such use of technology to introduce these new skill sets and mindsets that our workforce requires. And this is just the beginning, right? We only have 70 starter packs, but this is just the beginning on what, could be potentially really, really big in the way of learning, and even the way of teaching, right?
I love how you say only 70. It's already relatively comprehensive, yet more to come. However,
Yeah.
if I'm a if I'm a teacher and I'm listening in and I go, wow, that's
Mm.
exactly what I need. I want to do something that is going to be about gaming or whatever it happens to be, and I
Yes.
want to add in this extra support and I don't have that knowledge base, and something like this sounds appealing because it has that step by step for me. It has that guidance. It has that support. Where would I go? How do I get onto such a program? It's the right price. I'm not gonna have to go to my principal and beg for money before I understand what the program is. I can log on. I can explore. But where do I go?
So go to just Google skills for innovation, and you will come to a landing page that is hosted by Intel on this whole skills for innovation framework. I would need to get you a special login, Brett, for your listeners to sign up. We call it a verification code, for one of a better word. Really, as I mentioned to you, the right to use skills for innovation software is free for any educator that's truly interested to reinvent the classroom and make learning a joyous experience through the use of technology. And the partnership with you is a great starting point to leverage this. Um, but this verification code will allow your listeners to sign up, and there's with a unique email address and a passcode. With this verification code, you will have full access to the 70 starter packs that I talk about, right? The
Right.
educator's guide that maps out, for example, what's the learning objective, what's the overview of the lesson, what's the activity. There's even troubleshooting tips and assessment and rubrics all around it, right? And the actual teaching deck, right, with the um, hands-on activities and the guided learning experience and the key discussion topics and reflection as a result of the lesson. And of course, last but not least, the working files. The educators have a choice, right, or based on the subjects close to their heart and mapped to their curriculum, right? These whole working files to run this 2-hour lesson plan on the fly, right? But there's another key element, of skills for innovation that I like to talk about, Brett, if I may.
Yeah, of course. Go.
And and that's really the teacher professional development. And for those who are familiar in the past, maybe 20 years back, where Intel, as part of our corporate social responsibility and our true investment into the education segment, we introduced a program called Intel Teach, which I hear is fairly successful in various parts of the world, right? Um, we offered a platform, a program for governments around the world to introduce technology into the education segment, right? It's a full program for educators to learn how to use technology. Now, now this program has somewhat evolved in the latest iteration under the Intel Skills for Innovation professional development program, right? And we want to provide the opportunity for educators to be up to date with the trends, to maximize the learning outcome of their students, right, in how they teach. So, and also for educators, in my earlier discussion point, Brett, where we talk about how can we adapt technology in a hybrid learning environment? How can we create technology infused learning experiences to equip their students to be ready for what the workforce is looking for. So there are 4 levels of learning. Basically we have provide certification at each level, right? The first level is really what Intel Teach provided 20 years back, right? How do you adapt to technology? How do you use a computer? How do you use spreadsheets or you do a bit of video conferencing, right? So there are up to 80 hours of asynchronous learning across the 4 levels, so 20 hours at each level. Level 2, we talk about being a leader of learning experiences. So how do I learn remotely? How do I enforce or facilitate that student and educator in the learning experience in the digital world, right? And then level 3, we talk about analytical or creating what we call a catalyst of creative confidence. How do we expand from typically learning and at school and moving up Bloom's taxonomy where we apply or use what we learn in our day-to-day to solve real-world problems, right? How do we become more creative? How can we be more analytical to make better decisions? And finally, at the highest level, the shift in mindset that I talk about, right? From operational to strategic thinking. How do I become more entrepreneur in my mindset from a follower? Do I need to be a know-all of everything, right? So these 4 levels of are broken down into bite-sized courselets, about 10 minutes long, 8 to 10 lessons for each level, right? A 2-hour lesson, educator professional development that helps the educator go through, unpacking what it takes to learn and teach, and case studies of how they can apply the new skills that they learn, right? And at the end of it, we give certificates issued by Intel, right, for each level that you complete. And you do not need to do level 1 in order to go to level 4, right? You can move around at your own time and pace, right? Or maybe you may just focus on level 3 because you already know the rest pretty well, right? So
Have
these
that prior
official
knowledge.
certificates, correct, yeah, and you use this to be used, on your profile or the various ministries in charge of teacher professional development can recognize the teachers that are really taking that step forward to learn on these new skills in shaping that the young charges under them, right? So I'll pause there. I tend to get carried away. Thank
No,
you.
no, no. It's definitely good to hear your passion, and I think it's been fascinating for our listeners in today's episode to learn a little bit about who Audrey Lim is, to get a little bit of an insight, a little peek over the fence of the Singaporean psyche, and then such a dive into a plethora of tools that are there under the umbrella of Skills for Innovation, that teachers who are curious and teachers who want to either have that starter pack to be able to have these preset lessons and activities and support for their students, that's there, or else they can and then go through these 4 levels and look at these credentialing and be able to upskill themselves. Audrey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, sharing your expertise, and I guess I encourage all of the listeners, whether they be in Australia, Singapore, or in the fan base in Sweden or Bulgaria or anywhere, to go to Skills for Innovation, Google Skills for Innovation, log on, get your email in there, get that verification code, and go and explore. Audrey, thanks once again.
Thank you so much, Brett. And by the way, I got your book on Amazon. I just purchased it yesterday.
Oh, well, you'll have to let me know what you think about it, and I'm sure maybe we can have a chat on another podcast about the actual book one day. But we'll see how that goes. But
thank you for the opportunity to be on your show, Brett.
Not a worry. Thank you so much,
Really
Audrey.
excited. Yes, thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. All right, great episode just then with Audrey. Gave a fascinating look and insight into the Singapore psyche, the Singapore education system, and as you could hear, as you could tell, very passionate about innovation, particularly Intel's Skills for Innovation program. If you're a teacher, you're an educator, you want to find out more about that, make sure you Google Skills for Innovation, get your verification code, sign up. If you're not sure, reach out to me directly and let's do some magic and let's get going with innovation.